the abilities and all the character designs. That's one of the things that is just so good about this game.
Imo, Suzu, like all of these are DLC heroes that got added.
I will die on this hill. Roll Q was a band-aid to goats.
You're a poopy head.
Welcome back to Overthink, the game show where I ask contestants a series of Overwatch hot takes to see where they stand. Feel free to play along in the comments to let me know what your opinions are on these hot takes. And if you'd like to actually be on an episode, go ahead and sign up in my Discord. I host these live on my Twitch channel most Sundays, so please go follow me on there to catch a show live. And lastly, please don't forget to drop a like and subscribe for more content like this. 6v6 is way better than 5v5.
To me, 6v6 has a lot of benefits, and a lot of people delve more into why having a second tank is beneficial for the way the game plays. For example, like the structure of the game lets people have more structure, honestly, for team fights and a lot less 1v1s and stuff like this to actually make the game feel less like a duel simulator and more like a tactical game. But I'm honestly more concerned with the fairness of things. I think that from a balance perspective, from a player perspective, just from a world where we want to make everyone feel like we care about the same amount, having 2 of each role makes a lot more sense. I honestly would think 5v5 would work better in a world where there is no role queue, but in a role queue world, I think that there should be 2 of each role. I think it's the only context in which Overwatch makes sense. So that's my take.
I'm looking at this from my one trick, which is Reaper. My character made more sense to play in Overwatch 1 when I had more damage and everything had less HP. It was easier for my character, at least, to move around the map when there were 6 people, because I could just teleport on someone and instantly delete them instead of doing 2 to 3 shots. And once again, everything had less HP back then.
It's kind of a similar opinion to what Seto already said, in the fact that I was an off tank primarily. It was my favorite role in Overwatch 1, and that just doesn't really exist. The whole healing for your teammates, playing to like enable your support's survivability doesn't really work on tank in the Overwatch 2 format. Like, you have to be the space creator, you have to be the one like generally initiating fights as a solo tank. And that just doesn't like fit my playstyle. I have a tendency to feed when I'm doing that. I still haven't mastered it, and so I've reverted back to being a support main again. And so yeah, I miss my role. So in that sense, I would like the second tank back so I can have my role back.
I know that like a lot of people say it, but like as a new player, I would say that there's good sides to both. Like personally, when I was playing Overwatch Classic, I liked how there was more diversity with who you could play and how like team compositions varied more, stuff like that. But I also found that like teamwork was kind of weaker then, because like things could fall to chaos way easier. It was a little bit more chaotic, which is not a bad thing. But then with 5v5, I like it more sometimes, I like it less. One of the good things I find about it is that it's like more structured and it doesn't have as much chaos as 6v6, but I don't like the tank counter swap thing.
And the reason I'm in somewhat disagree is because I find 6v6 a little bit too chaotic, and the team fights just last like a little bit too long for my taste. I do find that both 5v5 and 6v6 are like arguably like around the same for me, but I would slightly give the edge to 6v6 because I just don't like that.
Support has become easier and easier to play over the years since Overwatch's release.
I think it's been easier because playing the classic mode just made me realize it's basically impossible just to be support at that time. It felt terrible just being forced to heal everybody, and like the limited options made it so much harder to just do anything on support, because you only had just like a handful of options. Like even after like the release of Ana and Moira and BAP, you still didn't have much things that can do for yourself. But now we just get the passive as well, which helped a lot, and just more utility for your supports that just make it a lot easier for them to be able to play the game.
The reason I'm in agree is because when it switched to Overwatch 2, there's a tank was taken out of the roster, which means that it was just overall more easy for the supports to heal their team, which means naturally they get to play more aggressive. And then also over time, mostly in Overwatch 2, they've introduced all of these characters with like these brain dead abilities like Iliari, Pylon, or Suzu on Kiri. So I just feel like support has just become really easy to play now.
I do kind of have to agree with what Scar said. My main characters are Kiriko and Brig, two of the strongest supports in this game. I've never played Classic Overwatch 1. I played Classic, and the supports in that are not fun to play at all. You are forced to heal, like they said. But, I do agree that supports are very overtuned. Kiriko, Suzu, Ilari Pylon, that's its own support. You have a third support with just that Pylon. But with one less tank, I've never played Overwatch 1, but with one less tank, a lot of that survivability is put on the support, so they have to have that in order to still, support.
I think supports became easier to survive with and their abilities got stronger, but they also picked up the role of also having the DPS while supporting, even more than they did in Overwatch 1, so I don't really think they got easier. It's just their job changed a little.
As I played like Classic Overwatch 1, I can agree that supports definitely feel hard to play, but they also had their strengths, I think. Sometimes like Zenyatta's like they were very imbalanced kits. Like Zenyatta's like super insane Discord but weak HP. And from when I played Overwatch 1, supports were really strong at the time when I joined, which is like season 8, right? When they were like actually season 7-ish, when they had the big mid-season patch. But like now they're pretty in a safe space. I think like tank and DPS are more powerful now.
Yeah, I don't agree with that just on a level of the statement. I'm not saying support is a difficult role. I'm someone that has played every role in this game since release in 2016. Support, there was definitely a phase in Overwatch 1 where it just kept getting easier and easier and easier. I mean, support in the double shield meta was brain dead. I played Baptiste, you just switched your brain off and you rotated between heal and damage, and you just did that same thing for like the entire game, and you were almost never under threat. But then they removed the off tank in Overwatch 2. They changed up some of the kits of some of the heroes. As was stated by other people, you have to do more damage. You have to be the one that enables yourself to survive now. Now, while I do think a lot of the heroes' kits are set up to enable you to be able to do that, it was still something that support players had to learn how to enable themselves to survive, rather than having someone that was their entire role was effectively to babysit you for the entire match. So I just cannot agree that it's got easier and easier throughout, like, since release. There was a phase where it got easier and then it got harder again, so that made me disagree with the statement.
Is there anybody that after hearing others speak would like to change their stance?
Thinking about what Unchanged said, it is true that with one less tank, it is a little bit harder to stay alive as a support. So I don't know, that just resonated with me.
After playing the classic Overwatch mode, I'm not sure it deserved Game of the Year in 2016.
I'm probably hindsighting this. I remember 2016 Overwatch being more fun than it currently is, but it's probably because I've played through all iterations. The game was way slower back then. It was also wildly unbalanced until they actually started pushing out hotfixes. It was a fun game, but looking back on it, it wasn't as good as I thought it was.
Okay, so I think Overwatch Classic is a whole different game from Overwatch 1, because no game is gonna be near perfect when it first comes out. No game is gonna be like, there's no such thing as the perfect game when it first launches. You have to have, especially in multiplayer games like hero shooter games, you have to have balance changes to make it perfect. So, but like, I've also never played Overwatch 1, only Overwatch 2, so I think objectively I can't choose if I agree or disagree. I think the only option for me is to stay neutral.
I believe that it did deserve Game of the Year because of how it reinvented what a hero shooter can be. Because most hero shooters just base off like one weapon class, or you have to share the weapons. But now in this game, you just have all these different things to do, and like the abilities and all the character designs. That's one of the things that is just so good about this game. That's just, I know it's not part of the gameplay wise, but it's just one of the best games just to represent personality and character. Another thing is, we've also know how the game's going to turn out. So when we play the original mode, we're just seeing like how it used to be and we just know like, oh, this is so much better now than it was before. But back then it was just like so new that no one really understood it, and everyone just had fun back then.
Yeah, so I feel like you really got to put into perspective how like monumental this game was at the time. Like it was like a crazy step forward in first-person shooters, like he says, and also we've become like really numb to Overwatch now because we've been playing it for all these years. But in reality, it's like it was like a really fun game on release because everything was new. Like every aspect of the game was like fresh.
I can see why it became Game of the Year, even though I never played the first game or anything. So I was kind of around, like back when it was only the first game, and it was really popular, like all over like the internet for years, not just 2016. And like what others said, it probably became that big because people have never seen like such a game like that, and because it's not like most other first-person games, different characters and abilities, and with all like the cinematics and lore, people are probably gonna expect something like big from Overwatch. Like it's like more things will keep coming, and everything was new, and I think people didn't take the game as serious back then.
So the hot take was specifically that it didn't deserve Game of the Year. Game of the Year is an award that's only awarded to new games that release in that year. So 2016 wasn't necessarily the strongest year for brand new games, while in the meantime, Overwatch was, as everyone else has stated as well, a trendsetter not just in gaming, but particularly within FPS and hero tap shooters in particular. It revolutionized like the genre. It was so crazily hyped when it released. I remember how excited I was getting my physical copy of Overwatch 2016 on my Xbox edition. I was so excited when I got that as an early gift. And yeah, everyone loved the game. It had great success immediately, and it was up against pretty weak opposition for the 2016 Game of the Year awards. So yeah, it won by a landslide, and it wasn't the only award it won that year either.
Roll queue was a mistake.
Okay, so I've actually made an entire YouTube video on this, but I will die on this hill. Roll Q was a band-aid to GOATs, and sure, people wanted it for a lot of other reasons, but I think it is what truly, like, I don't account it to being GOATs, I don't give it to stun meta. I would say that Roll Q is what made this game really start to decline, in my opinion. It gave it a lot more structure, but especially with trying Classic recently, it made me realize just how much more freedom we had back when the game first came out. I think that's what gave the game so much appeal. There's so many matches where people are stuck thinking, my Reinhardt is just not it, or my DPS do not know how to duel this Widow, or I'm getting 0 heals, and there is no feasible way you can do anything about that within the context of Roll Q. Sure, you can keep protecting your healers better, sure you can keep diving the Widow better, but if there's a job that you need to be doing that your team just clearly cannot, you can't do anything to combat this. You are stuck doing something, and I've never thought that was something that benefits Overwatch. I understand the idea of this being more formatted for like competitive, but you have to understand that this game is a game that people play casually as well, and even at high level people enjoy to not feel like they are locked into a trap where they can't do anything. And Roll Q has not only made queue times longer, which was the whole reason we had to lose a tank in the first place. It was not because tanks were a problem, but it's just another one of the band-aids that ended up creating other problems. GOATs should have been solved a different way, and Roll Q wasn't necessary other than GOATs.
I'm curious to see what everybody else thinks, but I'm also curious if anybody has like just straight up counterpoints to what Diva just said.
So I feel like in Overwatch 1, if you got like a full team full of like DPS, it was super annoying, and then they just wouldn't swap and wouldn't listen to you, and it was just really frustrating. And honestly, I feel like role queue really needed to happen to, you know, like counter goats in a way. Of course, it all stemmed from Brig, but because Brig was created in the first place, it just needed to happen.
So about I've heard the argument about teams of, normally people use the example of a full support team, but I applaud you for mentioning that it happens with other roles, especially full DPS, but I still think that you being able to have some kind of hero pool that delves into each of the different roles, even a bit, was part of what the ranking system was measuring in Overwatch 1. Part of the whole point was that you could make a team where things worked in any specific way, and if you didn't want to learn any healer, for example, it was your job to be so good at DPS you didn't need one.
There is still a game mode where you can do that. There is still a ranked game mode where you can do that. This game, as you said yourself, is predominantly centered around not just pro play, but team play in general. It is called a team hero shooter. That is the specific genre that this game fits within, where team play is a core aspect of the game. If they had entirely removed open queue from Overwatch, if they had not left a single trace of it behind, I would be somewhat less certain on my stance in just full-on disagreement, but they left it behind for the people who only enjoyed that. But for the people who look back at Overwatch, even Overwatch 1, and think, damn, most of the best team comps that were played were when you were running 2-2-2, like the healthiest team comps from Overwatch 1 were 2-2-2 team comps anyway. People wanted more ability to kind of guarantee that something along those lines was going to be what they were going to get to play in their games, which is what role queue was designed to do. And the fact that they left not just a normal game mode, but a ranked version of the open queue game mode for the people that didn't want that, like, they catered to everyone in a sense. And the fact that role queue is the one that became the most popular and most commonly played, I think answers the question of how the mass player base felt about that change.
Okay, so this is actually a really logical argument, and I will admit that the player base in some form has kind of chosen, although it's interesting that you're saying that, given that you are someone who agrees that 6v6 was better, because role queue is essentially what caused the need to get rid of a tank. And I know that there's people talking about bringing it back and stuff, but we're going to go back to similar problems we used to have with queue times. And speaking of queue times, it's no wonder that the mode is like not played as much, and that the queue times are sometimes not as good for this mode, because it's not balanced for it. It's not a real mode. You barely get anything to show that you did anything with it. No team is going to ever pick you up because you're good at it. It's a side mode. It's definitely there, but the game is not made for this, and it's kind of neglected at this point. Splitting the gameplay into like the player base into people who play this and people who play role queue has made it kind of a side thing. It almost feels like an arcade mode at this point with how the ranks are and how this whole thing plays up. And I still think that we would be able to have a much easier 6v6 world where we still could have 2 tanks even if we didn't have to have role queue specifically as the fix.
I didn't mind having a 30-minute queue for a good game. I liked some of the 2-2-2 comps. I think what really killed 2-2-2 was the double shield meta. Orisa doesn't have her shield anymore. Double shield, I think, would be much harder to play now, and that's the meta that killed 2-2-2. So yeah, I'd happily go back to my half an hour GM queues and get good games again.
Hard to disagree with you, Malga. I agree on both of those points.
Wow, being civil isn't gonna get my rent paid, guys. Come on. Argue with each other. Get me some clickbait content. Be like, no, you're stupid.
Right.
Cool. So back and forth is over. So let me just go back to our order of hearing everybody out. So Reaper, you are in the neutral stance. So you use your neutral pass for this one. So let's hear why.
I just played the Reaper guy. I've played him as 6 DPS. I played him in 2-2-2. It doesn't change. If I don't have a healer, I just have to play health packs. It's just how the game goes.
I think that not 6-6. Roll lock definitely was needed sometimes. Like, as someone mentioned earlier, like all of your teammates queuing DPS was really annoying. And it also brought order. But at the same time, not having roll lock also brought benefits sometimes. Like that, that's only a few that I liked. Like the idea of having like 2 tanks and like 1 support, 2 DPS, or having more diversity in the role composition was actually really fun. I tried Open Queue before, also Overwatch Classic. That I enjoyed that. But otherwise, I feel like you need roll lock to have everything in order and like proper.
I just don't like being. When I see a composition, it's just. I think it's just because I'm a newer player. I just don't want to be forced onto a role. And sometimes, if I don't immediately click somebody, I feel like I'm just going to get a role I don't want to play. That's my main issue with not having role queue.
Like Husty said, I'm also a newer player, so I don't know how much like of a stance I deserve on this. But I think that you should, yeah, like he said, I don't think you should be like forced to play something you aren't able to. I'm a support main. I cannot play anything other than Junker Queen and support. Maybe a little bit of Reinhardt, but we don't talk about that. So, but like, back in like season 10, I decided, you know what? I want free comp points. I'm gonna play open queue ranked, and I got Masters 4 in that, and I was like, dang, I must be pretty good. And I started playing in that, and then I realized I can't just support my way through that. And like, so I just think I should be allowed to choose the role I'm good at. And like, it may, again, like they said earlier, it may feel like you're stuck sometimes, but that's part of a team-based game. There's characters you can solo carry on if you need to, but like, you do have to accept that's how games are gonna go sometimes.
The game was better with 2 tanks.
I feel like I've covered somewhat my opinion on this hot take and some of the other answers. I was an off-tank player. It technically wasn't my highest role, but it was my favorite role. It was the role I played on a lot of teams as, and that role doesn't exist. I really enjoyed that role. As a support main, I really enjoyed having that role to help me when I was playing support. I think a lot of the balancing is better when you're not solely relying on one tank having to create all of the space and enable their team, and like having to play around just that one person's pick. I don't think is necessarily healthy for the game a lot of time, because what your tank's playing kind of dictates what other people need to play to enable your tank. Because if you don't enable your tank, they just die, and no tank pretty much loses every team fight. So yeah, I think it's just like the game was better with 2 tanks. I preferred one of the tank roles, and I think for a health of the player base's mentality, not having to solely rely on that one tank player in every game was better as well.
So there's a myriad of reasons that I feel like 6v6, like 2 tank, makes more sense than not having a second tank. I already touched earlier on how it's just more fair to the roles. Like, I mean, for people who aren't tank, you can balance tanks more like other roles and not make them some kind of giant monster, which will make them happy. But also for tanks, you can give them a partner in their role, and or bring, like Malgo said, their role back to the game. Like, does anybody ever think that often about the people who lost their entire role when we went to Overwatch 2? But it really did play in a completely different way. There is a fundamental part of Overwatch that was lost where, like, as for example, as a diva with a Winston, just as an example, I got to do such different things than I do alone. I got to look for very particular parts of space and play like angles that I'm never allowed to now, because I have to be playing the game in such a different way. And there's a tactical level for the tanks that is taken away, where you got to strategize in a way you just don't with any other role. And someone earlier brought up counter swapping, which was something I forgot to mention, honestly. There are so many reasons that having a second tank makes the game more enjoyable, and honestly, I love that people are bringing this up more often.
The reason I'm in somewhat agree is because although having 2 tanks is a little bit more chaotic in team fights, having the synergy with the other tank really makes the game more fun in a way. Like Rein Zarya, Orisa Hog when that was meta. Like some of it was a little cringe, but it was kind of fun to have synergy.
The quality of heroes introduced to the game has gone down over time.
the reason I think that the quality of heroes have gone down is because, like, for example, we've gotten characters like, I've already said this, but Kiri with Suzu, and then Mauga was introduced to the game, who's literally just hold down left and right click. And these characters are just kind of boring in general. Like, I feel like there are some fun aspects to them. Like, for example, Iliari, like, I like Iliari, but, like, she does just have a pylon that plays the game for her. So, like...
As someone who played since release, I've seen every hero that has been added to this game. I've also seen the state, as everyone has now, that the heroes were in when they released. And I can agree that there were a lot of issues with this game early on. And, you know, not all of the heroes were great or perfectly well made or whatever you may have, but and while I like some of the kits of the new heroes, I do think some of the abilities have gotten a little bit lazy. Yes, Juno has a ring that you have to move through, but ultimately it's just the third team speed ability in the game. Imo, Suzu, like all of these are DLC heroes that got added where everyone can agree that they're kits that are very frustrating to play against, even as heroes that I've played a lot. Brig on release was horrendous. BAP Immortality was broken, and I'm hoping that they get better heroes again, but given that Mauga was like as horrendous to the meta as he was, and the next one is another tank again who is likely to be really weak or really overtuned, I just think that the heroes, I love this game still, but I don't think they're releasing the best that they had in past eras.
I feel like there has been, like, I don't know, there's been hero releases I enjoyed. I mean, I liked Life Weaver, so I'm gonna get crucified for that, but I liked Ramatra even. I don't know. I think it's hit or miss, but I feel like that's how it is with every game. I don't think too much about this topic as much as other people do, but I've had stuff that I've enjoyed at the very least, and obviously there's problems with balance when heroes come out, but I think that's kind of a fun part of the game. Like, I like when a hero comes out and they're really good or really bad. It's kind of interesting to see how people play them. And then, what do you call it? That's how the game has always been, now that we can see with Classic. When those heroes released, they weren't balanced at all, oh my gosh. But I still love Classic, so yeah, that's my take.
For my opinion, I don't think it's the quality of the heroes that has been the issue with Overwatch 2. It's mostly just been the balance of the heroes when they release, and how the balance team has actually been interacting with the heroes to try to change their strengths and weaknesses. I think the only real issue that I've seen are some of the heroes are filling a similar role, like Baptiste Baptiste came out in Overwatch 1, but Kiriko released in Overwatch 2 and also had an immunity, which is an issue when you can't ban one of them, because then teams can start running 2 immunities. There's comps where healers can be completely safe, and there's not really a way to actually get to them without facing the other 3 people.
So me personally, I do agree in the balance thing. Like, honestly, the devs have been much more careful, like paying attention to what they do. Like, the propensity of overpowered or broken abilities like Mercy Res is not really a thing anymore. But also in terms of quality, it's gone way up. Like, back in the day, they could give a hero like a ball to throw, and, like, I'm not saying that exists, like a I don't know, like a kickball, and call that a day. Well, nowadays they put like voice lines, cool effects, everything into the hero, and they give as much content and attention to detail as possible. And it's like the ideas flourish a lot more. I think the quality has gone way up personally. If you compare Symmetra, like who's a hard light hero back then, to Life Weaver nowadays, the ideas, which are the same, are way different.
Is there anybody that would like to change their stance after hearing others speak?
Yes.
Wow. Okay, a lot of people.
Okay, so I'm Lizard. I was in somewhat disagree, but after hearing what they said, Ilari Pylon is literally just something that does the work for you. Obviously, I think, okay, maybe this is objective because I'm a Kiriko main, but I think some supports need to be overtuned, but at the same time, it's still overtuned in the end. And so I think that the quality of supports are rising, but the quality of everybody else's game because of those supports is decreasing. It's less fun for other people when such strong and fun supports come out. Because my favorite thing on Kiriko is to watch an Ana trying her best to get a good nade on my team, and then I just press RB and it's like, oh, have fun. Like, I do think that supports are slightly. I think just in general, heroes are getting slightly worse in general. Yeah.
I shifted over because I heard a lot of good points. I remember hearing this point from Flats. Hanzo ult used to be like counterable with like an ultimate back in the day, but now you can just use a immortality field or a Suzu to cancel a whole ult, and that just sounds terrible for ult trading. And it just feels like such a bad mechanic. And having even more is just annoying. But other points are like, some characters just do feel like the same thing. When I saw Juno's kit originally, I was like, is this not just Ana plus Lucio? But I was wrong. She's a lot more fun than I thought, but sometimes it just feels like the kit gets a bit repeatable. Especially as more and more characters get added.
I was really hoping to avoid like sitting myself in neutral, and like I don't like being a fence sitter. But even while making my own point, I kind of had to admit that while I don't think they're maybe the best heroes that could be made, and I've seen some like fan iterations of potential heroes that look super interesting that I think would like fit into the lore and have really cool abilities that would interact very interestingly in the game. I do still have to admit that I find a lot of the new heroes fun, at least in the 5v5 game mode. Like Juno, I've had a lot of fun with playing. I am a self-admitted like Mauga main on tank because I find the brain deadness of him funny sometimes. So while I might not agree that they're the best, they're still fun heroes to play, which I guess is ultimately what a video game's designed to be. So yeah, I don't think they're the best, I don't think they're the worst, they're still fun, so that parked me in neutral.
So a lot of people brought up, on both sides actually, the fact that this question, at least from how you phrased it, I think pertains also to Overwatch 1 new heroes, which I wasn't thinking of. And a lot of those heroes make me want to destroy my keyboard. Like people were saying stuff like Suzu, but then they were also saying stuff like Immortality Field, for example. And I am just thinking about all of the heroes that were added in Overwatch 1, honestly, and both Overwatch 1 and Overwatch 2 had a lot of good heroes. I feel like I already mentioned a couple of them, but I also feel like a lot of the heroes that were added make me want to cry, and so I agree that some of the heroes are not as inspired as others. It depends, so I'm in neutral now.
So we are all done, pretty much. Did anybody have any like closing remarks or anything that you guys wanted to say on this hot take before we wrap this one up?
Not a hot take, but unchanged. I have a question for the people that only got into Overwatch since post-release of Overwatch 2. Like, what was it that drew you towards this game? Because I was drawn to this game and have been stuck with it ever since the crazy amount of hype it got back in 2016. So I'm curious what, for new players, drew you to it.
December 31st, I was at my girlfriend's house, and she was like, "Want to watch me play a game?" And she was like, and I was like, "Yeah." And she was like, "All right, I'm my character's like this cute girl. She flies around and like saves people from dying." And I was like, "Oh, that must be fun." And then I'm like watching her play, and I'm like, "Dang, I really want to play that," because I saw the love of my life, Kiriko. And so I downloaded it, and
I thought you were gonna say I saw the love of my life play Overwatch, and
so did I.
Yeah, and I was like, that's so wholesome, and then you go, the love of my life, Kiriko. Holy.
Yeah, I said what I said. I said what I said.
And that's why
Me
you
and
guys are
Kiriko.
broken up, because she heard you call Kiri the love of your life and not her.
Subscribe to
To the 1, to the 1, to the 3. I play easy mode, and I play to win. I love to die, and I like to BRB. All systems checked out. Group up with me. 2 to the 1 to the 1 to the 3. I'm here to party. GG. A giant gorilla can keep up with me? You can't be serious.